Big projects come with big risks, and sometimes those risks end up outweighing the project's benefits. That leads to truly impressive objects and buildings being abandoned, and in some cases, they're abandoned before they're even finished. There are many reasons why an ambitious engineering or construction project might be given up and left behind, and we're about to take a look at some of the most stunning and striking of them all in this video. The correct name for this towering set of antennas in the Yvonne district of Ukraine is the Duga Radar, but the facility was known to radio and radar operators around the world as the Russian woodpecker. That's because of the distinctive tapping sound it broadcast during its years of operation, which was so powerful that it could be heard halfway around the world. The site was built during the 1970s and tasked with alerting the Soviet authorities to the possibility of an incoming ballistic missile strike. More than 1,000 workers lived close to Duga in a top-secret city, some of whom are still there today, even though the site has been silent since 1987. Because it stands close to Chernobyl, strategic difficulties arose in using the site shortly after the disaster, and so the decision was eventually taken to move most of the more valuable equipment at the site to Komsomolsk. Since then, Duga has stood as a steel skeleton, 500 feet tall and 300 feet wide. One day soon, it's expected that the whole structure will be demolished to make way for new wind turbines, but nobody knows when that day might be. Looking upon its structure from the outside, Kievs Garage number 7 has the appearance of a flying saucer. When you get inside, you'll realize that it's nothing quite so out of this world, but it's still a beautiful building. The facility is a bus station and was once a hive of activity in the center of Kiev, overseeing the arrival and departure of over 400 buses daily. Some of the old buses are still inside, but without a mechanic to care for them since the closure of the bus station in 2015, they've fallen into a state of severe disrepair. All of this is a far cry from how spectacular Garage number 7 must have looked when it was brand new in 1973, when 1,400 members of staff helped thousands of people connect with the right buses to make their journeys every day. Locally, the building is known to the residents of Kiev as the Circus, and it's the work of a little-known Russian architect called Zinkevich. His work is unique. Nothing resembling this design was ever built anywhere else in the Soviet Union. If you're a science fiction fan, you might have seen the movie Blade Runner 2049, in which case you might already be familiar with our next location because it was used in the making of the film. Just because it found a second lease of life as a movie shoot location after being closed doesn't mean it will be spared from demolition for much longer, though. So we should enjoy these images of it while we can. It's a power plant that was built close to Budapest in Hungary in 1950, and it continued doing that job for exactly 50 years until it was closed down due to decreased demand and new environmental protection laws in the year 2000. What caught the attention of the film's producers is the stunning scale of the place, as well as the beautiful symmetry of the rusting pipes and machinery. Urban explorers who have visited the site are amazed by the fact that there is still a power supply to the control room, and so it looks like workers could return to perform their daily shifts in there tomorrow. The site of Prora in Binz, Germany, is a monument to Adolf Hitler's vision of a golden age of Nazism that thankfully never arrived. Built during the late 1930s, this was the dictator's vision of an ideal holiday resort for German workers, close to the beach and capable of accommodating up to 10,000 people in cell-like rooms simultaneously. Prora was split up into 8 identical, charmless buildings sprawling across the edge of Rügen Island and occupying almost 3 miles of the land. Every single room had a view of the beach, and all of the resort's other proposed facilities were to be located behind the front walls. It wouldn't be luxurious, but it fit in with Hitler's philosophy that every hard-working German deserved a day at the beach. If Prora had been finished, it would have been the first of several such facilities, but the outbreak of the Second World War scuppered those plans. Since then, the limited rooms that had been built became a refugee shelter and a facility for the elderly, but it was largely deserted from the mid-1990s onward until a project began a couple of years ago to convert it into a series of luxury condos. Sleeping Beauty's castle is one of the most iconic buildings at Disney World in California. If you've ever been there on vacation, you probably had to queue up for a picture outside it so all your friends could see where you've been. The design of the castle is iconic and has many admirers, including the government of Turkey. In fact, the Turkish loved it so much that in 2014, they authorized the construction of a whole 700 Sleeping Beauty-style castles in the Mudurnu region, close to the Black Sea. Around 350 of the castles had been built in anticipation of the project being completed. But then there was a dip in oil prices and a period of economic disruption within Turkey, bringing all of the construction work to a standstill. Now, years after the point where the castles should have been finished, they stand as empty shells. It's uncertain whether the necessary work will ever be finished at all. The proposed gardens have never been planted. The promised American-style shopping mall doesn't exist. With the company that started the building work now bankrupt, Mudurnu may become the most beautiful and unique abandoned city on Earth. During the final years of the Cold War, the USSR was undertaking enormous construction projects and often had more than one purpose in mind for those projects. The new subway tunnels they began to build underneath Kiev in 1987 weren't just spaces to run diesel trains. They were also supposed to function as nuclear bunkers to protect civilians in the event of an attack from the West. Just 2 years after work started, it had to stop due to the financial struggles the Soviet Union faced in its final years. But it's amazing just how much construction work was done during the 2 years of labor that happened. The tunnels and side tunnels, abandoned for 30 years, now have stalactites 3 feet long dangling from the ceilings, while rust gathers on the thick blast doors. Some parts of the bunkers and tunnels are in better condition than others. Flooding caused by faulting construction means that some of them have 2 feet of standing water, while others remain almost pristine. The shells of the control rooms, offices, and communication bunkers down here will never be finished, and so they stand as a testament to a time of fear. We've looked at a couple of Nazi-era giant structure plans from 1930s Germany already, and now here's another monumental idea that had to be abandoned due to the start of the Second World War. If it had been finished, the Deutsches Stadium, which literally translates as the German Stadium, would have had a capacity of 400,000, making it almost 4 times larger than Michigan Stadium, and twice as large as the now closed Strahov Stadium in Prague. It would comfortably have been the largest stadium ever created, but Albert Speer didn't intend for it only to be used to host sports. Instead, he envisioned it as a place where patriotic Germans could gather for Nazi party rallies. The first stone of the stadium was laid in September 1937, and by early 1939, approximately a tenth of the necessary work had been completed. Much of the wood used in the completed work had to be reclaimed to repair a nearby town damaged by Allied bombs during the war. And now, all that remains is the concrete foundations. The population of the world is growing at exponential rates. That, in turn, means more people die every year, and more burial space for those people has to be found. Most countries around the world are in the process of building more graveyards, but not the same way the graveyard in Chongqing, China was built. Instead of hosting the remains of the dead, this graveyard holds the remnants of a mostly dead form of transport. Before China entered its current economic boom phase, ownership of a car was too expensive for the average Chinese family, and the majority of people traveled by taxi if they needed to go anywhere on the road. Now, car ownership is more affordable, and there isn't so much demand for taxis. With no further use for them, the unwanted taxis are rounded up and consigned to this big, yellow Chongqing dump, which looks no less bizarre from a distance than it does close up. Some of the taxis are more than 30 years old, although many are more recent and are still in good enough condition to be driven. The decision to dispose of them all in this manner is a little puzzling to us. Why not just repaint them and keep them as personal vehicles? As we head toward a post-industrial age, the sight of abandoned factories is becoming more and more common in towns and communities that used to depend upon the old buildings for employment. Only one of those factories can accurately be called the largest abandoned factory in the world, though, and that's the Packard Factory in Detroit, Michigan. Built in 1911, this was the most advanced car-making factory of its time. There were, and technically still are, more than 3 million square feet of office and factory floor space within its walls, and the site it occupies is over half a mile long. The gigantic factory was a statement of intent from Packard, and yet it lasted less than half a century. By 1958, the company had ceased to exist, and their factory was closed. No subsequent use has ever been found for the factory, although parts of it have on occasion been used by smaller businesses, and several television shows and movies have used it as a filming location. Since 2012, the buildings and the land they stand upon have belonged to a millionaire property developer based in Peru, who intends to eventually create a blend of residential and commercial property here, tearing the old buildings down in the process. There's something about this abandoned hotel in the Bali Highlands of Batu, Indonesia, that makes people feel a little uneasy about paying it a visit. We suspect it's all probably down to its name. The locals refer to it as the Ghost Palace Hotel. From its appearance, you would guess that it's been abandoned since the 1950s, but the hotel and the surrounding resort attractions weren't even built until the 1990s. And they were abandoned just days before they were due to welcome their first guests. Back then, it was known as the P. Bedugul Taman Recreasi Hotel and Resort, and it was supposed to be at the top end of luxury accommodation within the region. Folklore says that all the staff who were supposed to work here turned up the day before it was due to open for their initiation and vanished overnight, with their ghosts now walking the corridors. A more likely explanation is that it was built by Tommy Suharto, who was known to engage in corrupt business practices and eventually went to prison for ordering the assassination of a judge in 2002. The once beautiful resort of Villa Epecuén in Buenos Aires, Argentina, would probably still be doing a roaring trade with tourists today if nature hadn't turned against it so violently 30 years ago. The villa, which stands on a picturesque location close to a lake, opened in the 1920s to offer visitors a relaxing break from the cut and thrust of their busy day-to-day lives. Up to 5,000 tourists stayed at the villa simultaneously, spending their days sightseeing or bathing in the saltwater lake, which was said to be able to heal old wounds. All was fine until 1985, when an unprecedented storm hit the area and caused a giant wave to form in the lake. The wave destroyed the dam. The subsequent runoff of water ran straight through the dike, and the village was suddenly sunk 30 feet below the new water line. The change in the tide lasted for 30 years, and so it wasn't until 2009 that parts of the old villa began to resurface as the water subsided. Too much damage has been done to revive the villa, and even if that were possible, how would anyone ever be able to trust the lake again? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.